All right. Well, we'll go ahead and kick things off. So we did meet earlier, and it was really nice to be able to meet with, roughly 30 elders, deacons out in the backyard of the church tonight, and everybody had their masks on, so we were super responsible. I didn't get to see the smiling faces that I get to see here online. So that the upside of the 2D that I'm getting here is that I get to see some faces, and you guys get to do the same for others. So with that, welcome back. I know it has been a kind of a long go of it since I think it's March 12th is really kind of when things started to kick in. And hopefully this serves as kind of a re-engagement with the church and with your elder and deacon roles here for this church year. So we're super excited to have you, and I feel very blessed to be the voice tonight to basically kick things off for us. Before we really get into things, the first thing I'd like to do, and I was able to do this again in the backyard of the church tonight with people live, but say thank you and recognize Carla and the staff for their resiliency, their steady hand at problem solving, everything that they've done, not only to keep the lights on, but to thrive in a period that, could really define an organization one way or the other. So what I would normally do if we weren't on Zoom, I'd ask you we'd take a pause and clap and say thank you, but maybe we can just give like a thumbs up to our, leaders here and staff and the hard work they put in. And I'm sure the stressful nights that they've done on behalf of all of us. So thank you. With that, I think what we'll jump into is T'Pring has some words to say. So she's our chair of the board. And so T'Pring, I'll turn this over to you.
Yes, let's join our hearts together in prayer and open with prayer. Holy God, we are painfully aware that not is all as it should be. The world around us feels thick with suffering, tight with anger and tension, unsettled by so much that has changed and continues to change. Like the psalmists of old, we're tempted to wonder, where are you, God? But God answers, look around. I am the face of the exhausted firefighter. I am the hand of the caring nurse who holds a cell phone to a COVID-19 patient so they can speak to their loved ones. I am the feet of the essential worker and the fingers of the crafter sewing masks. I am the heart of the passionate protester and the courage of the police officer. I am the dedication of the teacher and the perseverance of the vaccine scientist. Most holy God, as we meet together by way of this truly miraculous technology, may we delight in the recognition that you are also here in the faces and the hands and the hearts of each other. Amen.
Thank you, T'Pring. So one of the things that we will jump into from the get-go is just a little bit of housekeeping. And I believe that you guys have been supplied a link to, well, yep, here we go on your screen. We're going to just quickly go through the roles and responsibilities of the deacons and elders. So for a deacon, the role is deacons promote the growth and welfare of the church. Those responsibilities traditionally are serve communion and collect offering and worship, participate in circles of care. And then obviously those two things are kind of on the shelf. Then we can continue to support the church financially, participate in one or more ministry area of the church, attend quarterly elder deacon meetings. All right, next slide, please. From an elder's perspective, An elder's role is to provide visionary leadership through conversation, attitude, and action in everyday life. Our responsibilities are serve communion, take offering and worship, participate in circles of care, support the church financially, participate in one or more ministry area, pray at the table, attend quarterly elder deacon meetings. I often need reminders of those roles and responsibilities, and it's kind of nice every once in a while to pull that back up and remember what it is that we signed up for and where our heart takes us. With that, one of the things that being the chair of the elders this year, what it meant to me was there was something I was able to bring with me from my previous church life. I started here at Country Club Christian in around 2006, so I've been here for a little bit. But before that, I was with a different church, and one of the things that I really enjoyed was that it challenged me to do service. And the reason that I needed that is I tend to be a person that can get, fall into my comfort zone and not really step out and take too many risks or do things for others just out of the blue. I needed a church and someone that would challenge me to just maybe hit some tiny targets or tiny goals. And so for a long time, it's really been a desire of mine to maybe bring that to our church. And so what we're asking is I have a spiritual challenge. I want to re-engage this group of people, the elders and the deacons, who are the leaders of this church, who are following in the footsteps of Jesus, to re-engage in service and to come back out of this COVID kind of where we're sitting on the sidelines for the last 6 months. I think as a group, I would personally like to see us start to commit to getting out in the community and touching lives, and in turn being blessed and adding to this beautiful church and congregation and family and community that we've built hard prior to COVID coming on. What I think that looks like is something to the degree of 2 to 4 service events, call it in the next 4 months. I think we're kind of sitting around and we're looking for a reason to, we're looking for purpose, and we're looking to fill our hearts and touch other people's lives. And there's a lot of people out there that need help. And so we're not going to be putting a check mark by anybody's name or really tracking any of this. But what I would ask is I'm going to challenge my family to do roughly 4 service events in the next quarter. And what we're hoping for is that you as elders, as leaders of this church, and deacons, that you will be inspired to follow the footsteps of Jesus Christ and come out and find a way that is comfortable for you, that fits, how you would interact in a COVID world, to touch lives. And the church has wonderful outlets, a myriad of different choices for you to leverage over this time. And then what we'll do is Catherine Stark-Korn will walk you through those here in a second. So I'll give her the floor in a minute. But before I do that, there has been some internal conversation amongst the staff about a different type of opportunity, and it is referred to as Called Together. And Joe Walker is I'm going to let him take the floor at this point and speak about Called Together, which is a wonderful program and a way for us to touch people's lives within our congregation. And then after that, Catherine Stark-Korn will go through any of the service opportunities that I hope that you can find that speaks to your heart. Joe?
Thanks, Jason. I'm old enough that I can remember days when we didn't have cell phones and Zooms and emails, texts, social media, all that. And they're wonderful tools. And as many of you know, I use all of them all the time. In fact, I used every one of those today in our shared ministry. But there's still nothing that takes the place of a good old-fashioned conversation. And ideally, those were conversations in person, but that's much more difficult now. And so a phone conversation is a wonderful way to stay in touch with folks. You will remember that at the beginning of the pandemic, we organized an effort and we called all the members of the church, and we had some wonderful conversations. We found out about what was going on in their lives. We found out about their concerns around the pandemic. And we also were able to communicate our plans as we knew them at the time. Obviously, those have shifted and changed. It's interesting because, over time now with the pandemic has caused so much disruption and so much change in terms of relationships. We and other churches and lots of organizations have kind of rediscovered phone calls as a best practice in our communication strategies. Phone calls, I think, are particularly important for our church and probably for lots of churches because a surprising number of folks either don't have any computer access, or they have very, very limited computer access, or perhaps they have limited computer skills. And so we rely solely on emails and those, and streaming and those kinds of things. We don't know what's going on in their lives, and they don't know what's going on in the church because they're not on those networks, or if they perhaps have older internet or something, it's pretty spotty. I know Paul Catelli, who's our IT genius, and we spent a lot of time on the phone today trying to coach people and help folks who I haven't had a chance to check. I hope they're online with us today. The other reason that phone calls are important is because it's easy for emails to get lost in just an avalanche of electronic media. I will confess that I have a personal email account that probably has emails that are 5 years old, no kidding. And they're from organizations that I love and would love to work with. Jason was just talking about, getting out and doing things and, or writing notes or letters or whatever, I've got stuff I would love to do, but I know that it's buried in that avalanche, and I'm likely not going to get back to it. So we're organizing tonight, we're rolling out this new ministry, and it's called Together. And I want to give a shout out to Laura Shop. She came up with that. And I love that name. What a great title. Elders, deacons, and other folks are going to make phone calls to our members again on a regular basis. And what we're really trying to do is to create a conversation. We're trying to simulate, where my office is here in the corner. So the parlor's right there. Those wonderful conversations we had in the parlor, or out in the hallway, or in the back of church, or out in the parking lot, where, I could say, hey, what's going on? Or you could say, hey, what's going on with somebody? And they'd say, hey, this great thing happened. We had a grandbaby, or a new job, or whatever. Or, we could notice that somebody was down or limping or something, and say, hey, what's going on? And they could say, oh, I hurt my foot, or I lost my job, or whatever that might be. We could have those conversations, and that is hard to do at this point. So these phone calls and this conversation is going to allow us to be proactive. We're going to reach out to folks, and we're going to ask them how they're doing. We're also going to invite them, again, back to what Jason was just talking about a minute ago. We're going to say, we do have ministry opportunities. I'm always amazed at staff and the newsletter and such, all the wonderful things that are going on, and so we're going to pick some of those and help communicate those and help people be aware of those so that they can volunteer and can get involved. And we're going to try and be more personal, I know maybe seem like we're less institutional, so that when people are overwhelmed when something's going on, hopefully they'll think to call us, and if not, we're going to be in a position where we're going to be, again, proactive and reaching out to them. You're going to see a basic template here on the screen. There are some slight variations because we have segmented demographic sectors of the population, to use the big fancy term. That means there are some subgroups, but the basic template is the same for all the calling ministry. We're going to make quarterly phone calls to just 5 members, 5 people, and the same 5 each time. So you'll have an opportunity again to build a relationship, for there to be some familiarity and some trust. If you don't catch them on the phone, there's an email and a mail follow-up option. And this is a really important piece. There's going to be a report mechanism so that we know who we're reaching. Just this last week, and we discovered we had somebody's phone number that, when somehow or another we'd gotten it wrong. And so we reached out to that person in person and and they were delighted to hear from us. And we've got the phone number now. And just at the earlier meeting, I saw some folks who knew that person, and I said, "Hey, so-and-so says hi." And it was just, it's those little things to connect and make sure we stay connected with folks. And so we're going to invite you to send in reports. And Ann, again, thinking about the parlor, how Ann would be sitting out there helping people organize for signups and things. Well, Ann is going to help us harvest and organize all that information. We've designed it, I hope, that in a way that it's going to be fun. Like, say, back in the beginning of the pandemic, one of the bright spots of that very confusing and dark time was that we did have some wonderful conversations, and people felt, the warmth of having a good conversation in both directions. And we felt good that people were being contacted, and at that point, the ministry piece was complicated, but that was so good. So we want to recapture that warmth, that fun. It's simple. And one of my favorite words, it's doable. So it's one of those things that this is what we do, and we can do it easily and get it done well. We want to think about how we are all called by Jesus, and we're looking forward to the opportunity for elders and deacons and for other folks to volunteer to be called by Jesus, called together. Thank you.
I guess I will jump in after Joe. As Jason said, there are so many reasons to get involved in this time in the life of our community and our country and our world. And Joe highlighted one way that we're going to be nurturing each other. And I just want to share very briefly a few outward opportunities that may be of interest to you. Our church in these months has been very supportive of our mission agencies throughout this challenging time. And just recently, some of our Metro Mission diehard champions have been able to go back on site in small numbers, and there's great excitement and happiness with that. We need to continue to be the hands showing God's love in the community and offer our support and service to these vital organizations. I know so many of you give of your time and talents in many ways. I just want to offer you some of our mission partners that we know are able now to receive volunteers, as some organizations still are not able to host volunteers on site due to COVID limitations and some of the way they're functioning right now. A key priority in this moment in time is to support our mission partners in their critical work of food distribution. And I know most of you, or all of you, are aware of food insecurity and how it is growing not only in our nation, but particularly in our community. There are many people who've never had to seek support that are now finding themselves in need of that kind of help. Individuals and families seeking food assistance in our own community has increased over 20% in the past summer. And so I think this is such an important time for us to live out our faith in tangible ways. We know that not everyone is ready or able to go into public settings right now, and we are seeking things that possibly could be done from home. But what you see in front of you now is a link to a website that is now on our church website. It's a web page that has fall service opportunities, and it shows those mission partners who are able to receive volunteers right now. And it gives you a way to just click on a link that takes you directly to a place to sign up with them. So you can do it when it's convenient for you. If you and a family member want to go and volunteer, it will have more information. Some of them do have age limits on them, but there are family opportunities on there also. We also have the link for Grace at Work Partnership Day, which is coming up at the end of September. This month, we'll be focusing on Hartman Elementary. It's an outside project. We'll be using safe practices to make sure we are all feeling comfortable being there, but we will try and spruce up their grounds and their outdoor classroom for when they are able to be back on their campus. And volunteers of all ages are welcome to that. We will be updating the web page, so please do check it. If whatever is linked there is not a good fit for you, we will be continuing to add things as we are aware of what is available. And on behalf of the Metro Mission team, let me just thank you in advance for all the ways that this congregation is God's caring presence in the world. Thanks.
So it's great to see all of you, and thank you for taking the time this evening to touch base and reconnect with the church. And I'm going to spend just a few minutes, maybe 10, 15, looking back at where we've been as a church in the last year. And then we're going to spend about 15 minutes, we're going to break into small groups thinking about where we're going in the future as a church and getting some of your input into that. So our church year begins July 1 and goes through June 30th. So I'm going to talk about the 12 months that ended June 30th. And our church board sets the vision of ministry based on input from the congregation. And the vision of ministry that we worked on together last year as a congregation had three parts. One, we wanted to offer pathways for spiritual development to people of all stages of life and faith. So we're not all at the same place in our faith journey. We're not all in the same stage of life, but we all need to grow in faith. The second is we wanted to strengthen our ministries in the Northeast. We wanted to expand our partnerships there and deepen our congregational relationships there. And the third thing we wanted to do was learn about our potential new members and determine ways that we might present ourselves to them. So this is part of the vision that I laid out 3 years ago when I said we need to be becoming the church for our next 500 members. What do they want? What do they need? And how can we be God's presence in the world with them going forward? So this is how we did together as a congregation on those three goals. On the first goal about spiritual development, there is so much I could talk about for the next hour, but I'm just going to cherry pick a few highlights to share with you. One is that we had the largest pastors class we've had in 11 years. We had 18 members of a very vibrant pastors class, and it was really exciting for us as a church. Another highlight was that we started a new Roots group for those in their 20s and 30s. It's always a challenge starting a new group, but I'm thrilled to report that that group's attendance has doubled or maybe tripled since COVID began, continuing to do some really exciting things like service projects, and they met with the mayor Sunday night in our back lawn. We had 108 people at community camp in Colorado. As far as I know, that's a record. And we had a wait list and a full camp for this year. So that program is continuing to thrive with families. And we had 261 folks attending Backyard Bash, which I think is about double what it was the year before. And we had some really cool new things that we offered targeted for senior adults, such as the Stubborn is Not a Plan workshop. A little bit more on this goal, we had 9 neighborhood communion groups that were meeting in homes and in driveways and in the backyard of the church with 93 people participating. Some of those are brand new members, some of those are longtime members, and they're intergenerational, and I continue to hear, raise your hand if you're in one of those. People love these groups. Yeah, they're awesome. We had Faith Bistro, Faith Book, Faith Pub. If it starts with faith and it has to do with having a drink together, we do that. And we do it well, and people really enjoy the relationships that are formed in those groups, as well as the Monday night classes where we grow spiritually and learn new things with Dr. Mike Graves and the wonderful teachers he brings in, the Bible study, the Sunday school classes. And this summer, multiple book groups were popping up because of people's interest in the racial justice issues. We sent a team to Ecuador back when we could still travel and deepened our partnership there. We started this Heart and Mind podcast, which I think is kind of a fun story. We really had been looking for ways to expand our reach And we know that a lot of people like podcasts now, but when Mike first started teaching classes, he was like, I taught in the seminary. I don't want to teach online. I want to teach people. They can ask questions. We can be in dialogue. But we kept thinking about ways to do that well. And about the time that COVID hit, we had really branded the Heart and Mind podcast, and we started learning how we could stream the classes. And all of a sudden we realized in those early months that people were watching those classes and listening to those podcasts, not just in Kansas City, not just in our church, but in other states. People were telling relatives and friends, you got to listen to this class on Revelation or on salvation or whatever. So we really increased our reach on spiritual formation there. Last fall, we had an amazing music series that included college students and young children and Bach enthusiasts, and was a real outreach to the community. And we revitalized the 11 a.m. worship service, adding new music and new opportunities for silent reflection, and marketed that back out to the community. And we continued to companion our church members with times of grief by conducting those funerals and nurturing those families through a really pivotal life moment. The second goal was about our Northeast partnership. And one of the cool things that happened this past year is that we made new opportunities for people who work 9 to 5, Monday through Friday, to really get involved by having some evening activities and some weekend activities and things that people could do with young children and things our teenagers could do. So we really deepened our partnerships there. We added Urban Farm Guys as one of our partners. And we made a very significant commitment financially to Neighborhoods of Hope and Kansas City tenants, because we know now, both locally and nationally, that one of the most important things we can do to alleviate poverty is to provide an opportunity for a stable home. And so we've made a multi-$100,000 commitment from our last capital campaign and committed money to our new capital campaign to providing not just a spiritual home for us here at 61st and Ward Parkway, but providing a home for families to work their way out of poverty and into self-sufficiency. We are going to plant 100 trees when we ever get around to celebrating our 100th anniversary. I'll talk about that later. And this is a conservative number, but we know, because we can count them, that we served either hot meals or sack lunches to 12,864 folks, and that we did 3,000 hours of community service. And during this past year, we had to say goodbye to one of our staff leaders in this area, Reverend Corey Meyer, who came to us for a time-limited 3-year commitment to help us launch this Northeast partnership more deeply. He transitioned this midsummer, and then Catherine Stark-Korn, who was already in children's ministry, moved over into the area of the Northeast and our metro missions. And we're really thrilled that the church was able to keep this commitment to the Northeast and to our hands-on mission efforts. And then the last goal was, how are we going to reach out to those who are not yet part of the congregation, but who hunger for God's justice and peace and beauty and hope? And so we really did a series of one-on-one conversations with people who are not yet part of the church and people who are part of the church to say what really matters here. We did some elder deacon work at the retreat on this. We're working on a marketing plan, and we're having events like Trunk or Treat, where we can get to know our neighbors and invite people in and learn more about them and their needs. And our board has defined, our church board has defined, that we really want to know more about the needs of those who live in a 1-mile radius about the church. So we're looking at the demographic data there and trying to get a better feel on how could we be a good neighbor to those who live adjacent to the church. So let me stop and tell a story here, because I think the list can be overwhelming, but a couple of stories have stood out for me that our staff has shared. One I shared with you about the podcast, but in terms of this whole mission work and spiritual formation, this summer we had what's called a service learning camp for our upper elementary age kids. And some of the kids that came to that got so excited about the project that they were doing of it was kind of an assembly line where you'd put rice and vegetables into a packet and form these meals that a family could just quickly cook. And we distributed those to Della Lamb. And the children learned about food insecurity. And one of those kids went home from that camp and had a lemonade stand with his siblings to raise money for that project. So that lets you know that we're not just passing out food, but we're changing hearts and minds of our young people and forming the deep character and compassion that we want for our world. One other story I'll share with you. You know what? I'm going to save that story. Let's go to the next slide because it fits here better. So we're looking at what happened over a 12-month period, but the final 3 months of last year, March, April, May, and into June, mid-March into June, we were suddenly in this time that no one on this call and no one that we know has ever lived through, and that is this pandemic. On a Thursday at 11, we decided we wouldn't be having church that Sunday, and we would have to have online worship. It wasn't safe to gather anymore. And so we had to figure out, what does it mean to be the community of faith, the body of Christ, the people of God, when we can't gather and do what we've always done? And so several things happened. One is I saw in each of you and in all of you together and in our wider community and in our staff, a deep spiritual resilience. At 11 o'clock, I said, we can't have worship this Sunday. We've got to figure out how to stream this worship. And by 2 o'clock that afternoon, our staff had assembled how we were going to do this electronically, the order of worship, who was going to do what, how we were going to tape it. And the response has been absolutely overwhelming to the worship. And I want Matt, who's hiding under CCCC administration, to show his face. Matt, can you do that? There's Matt. Matt Thompson started on our staff on January 1, and 10 weeks later, all of a sudden, we couldn't gather for worship. And Matt has been absolutely amazing with technology. He spends hours and hours and hours and hours, not only putting together the music and the worship, but editing that broadcast so that it is a very seamless, powerful, meaningful experience. So everybody, thumbs up to Matt. I see everybody. We really appreciate you. And some of you had heard Matt play the organ, but you hadn't seen his face because he was so new and you haven't gotten a chance to know him. So I'm excited for us to be back together so that you can all know Matt better. So some amazing things happened in our pandemic response to worship, in that attendance went up by 70%. So for the first 9 months of that year, our average worship attendance was 427. And from March 13th through the end of that year, June 30th, our average attendance was 728. Really remarkable response to how hungry people were to continue to worship. In spiritual formation, we added some stuff and adapted some stuff. We added the daily prayer line, which has been so meaningful and continues to get lots of calls. And I love all the prayers that you guys have submitted. The elders and deacons hand delivered to people's homes, to 800 homes, candles so that we could light our candles and begin worship together. Classes and groups and Bible studies started Zooming and streaming. And we put a tent in the backyard, and we started having youth group and children's groups and family activities. And you know, the congregation just reached out and said, how can I help? And one day I was sitting here at my desk and somebody called and said, what does the church need? And I said, we need a tent in the backyard. And he said, I'll be there in 15 minutes. And he brought a check so that we could rent that tent for 2 months. And then people continue to find it meaningful. So we were able to say to AA and all of our different groups who meet here, you have a safe space to meet in our backyard. The children's ministry, they didn't miss a beat when the children couldn't come to church. Catherine and April were out visiting those families in driveways, and people started saying, what can we do for those who don't have jobs? And we raised $13,000 for the COVID Relief Fund, which we've been distributing in grants through the Pastoral Care Department and Joe's wise leadership. The pen pal relationships between the seniors and the children have been fabulous. And the preschool and Parents Day Out program took a break in the spring, but they resumed this summer with summer school, and they're in full swing this fall with the full enrollment and wait list for all the classrooms. And we are not just open, we are a model preschool, not just for our city and our region, but even across the nation. People are calling and asking, how did you open? What protocols are you using? And I'm super thrilled that we have a safe preschool that families trust, and we're providing a real service to the community. Next slide, outreach. You did some amazing stuff. You delivered meals to frontline workers in hospitals and care centers, distributed hundreds of handmade and purchased masks, and provided thousands of meals through our partner agencies at a time when food insecurity became a really serious problem. So now here it is, September. This has gone on way longer than any of us thought that it ever would. And we're not quite sure when it's going to be safe to gather again. And so we need a plan. And my pandemic plan is the same today as it was at the end of May. We want to keep people safe, we want to create community, and we want to protect the vulnerable. I don't know when we're going to worship again in person. We will worship again in person when it's safe and when it's advisable, and we're in constant conversation with city leaders, medical leaders, and with congregational leaders about when is the right time to be together. Next is our centennial. We are coming up on our centennial. We've been planning for it, and we had hoped to begin that celebration this fall, but we know that in order to truly celebrate, we need to be together in person. And so some stuff is going to continue on schedule, like the history book that has been written about our church, which is almost done, and we will release it as soon as it is. The gift campaign was off to a fabulous start. We had great momentum, and we're going to resume that campaign this fall and into the spring. And we had some amazing events lined up with some notable guest speakers and some former pastors coming into town. We will reschedule those at a time when we can all be together, and we will begin to mark through worship and articles some of our key historic moments. Okay, I'm going to take a break now and let T'Pring tell you about the financials.
Thanks. Though not particularly exciting, it is important to keep a pulse on the financial health of our congregation. And as such, the board looked closely at the end of year report that was handed to us by the Finance Committee. We looked at that in August, and this is what kind of summarized came to the board. Our total income was just over $3 million. About half of that, a smidge less, was in the form of pledges, donations, contributions, offering trays, that kind of thing. We had about $500,000 miscellaneous income, and the early childhood programs are a profit-making unit of the church, and so $667 was contributed to that. The fundraising was actually very low this year because it was not able, were not able to hold the annual auction in the spring like we had planned. So that's actually a low number. We get a little bit of money for allowing our tower to be used as a cell phone lease. And I will make the joke again that I wonder if we knocked off a few bucks of that, we could actually get cell phone service in the building, but maybe there's a way we can negotiate for that. And then endowment support is $384,000 of our income line. Our expenses, the total was just over $2,800,000. And just kind of break that down broadly into the service areas of the congregation. We spend about $1.3 million on connecting on the activities and keeping our congregation connected. About $870,000 goes to service and $700,000 to worship. So if you crunch all those numbers, we ended up with a net positive of just right at 174, just 500,000, which is, we usually try to work towards net zero, so this number is very good, and the board and the finance committee decided to keep that in reserve because finances and it's really uncertain times. And going forward, we're going to keep that in reserve. And if we do not use it, we're hoping we don't have to use it. It will be contributed to the gifts campaign or some such that the finance committee and the board designates it. So a good, healthy year.
Okay, thank you, Chapring. So these are our goals for the coming year, which I'm not going to read to you, but just to give you a quick glance at, and this will be recorded and this is on the website if you want to dive into those, but this is what our board is working on this year. But I want to go ahead and jump to input from you all. So what the board does is every year we wrestle with open questions. An open question is a question that is really important to ask, but for which we do not have an answer at the moment. And so I want your input into the open question, because part of what we want to do as a board is to hear from you about what matters and how to answer the open question, which may take months or even a year to get to. So the board we had our retreat last weekend, and we have 2 open questions that will set our agenda for the year. One question is, how do we become a congregation that is anti-racist? Tom Thornton, I think, who's on this call, is a board member, and he said, until I went to the anti-racism training workshop that the church had, I didn't know there was a difference between being non-racist and being anti-racist. And so as a congregation, what can we do to be a part of the solution? And so we're going to be looking at that as a board this year. The second question that we're going to look at as a board this year is, what kind of faith community do we want to be post-COVID? Because this is going to end, and we will be a different church then. And what is that different church going to look like? And that's the question I would like for you all to talk about in small groups tonight. And when we break you into small groups, the first thing you're going to do is designate in your group a note taker. And the note taker is going to record what each person says and then email it into me afterwards. So the 2 questions you're going to look at, and we'll have about 12 minutes for this, is so everybody should have a minute to answer both questions, is a time when your spirit, share a time when your spirit was touched by participation in Country Club Christian Church prior to March 13th. So when we could still gather, but we weren't social distancing, what really touched your life? And what parts of our in-person life do you most look forward to restoring when we can be back together? And then the second question is, share a time when your spirit has been touched by participation in our church since March 13th, since we've been social distancing. What's really impacted you? And what do you think we've learned that we should then carry forward, that we have the opportunity now to be a new kind of church? So any questions about the small group assignment? Because we're going to put you in the groups. You'll just randomly be in a group, and then we're going to pull you back out of the groups in about 12 minutes.
Okay. I don't know how some of the other breakout rooms were, but we're already shedding tears this late in the night. So pretty awesome stuff. I miss you guys. With that, if we can bow our heads. Lord, thank you that we are a family in Christ. Help us to share his love and legacy with everyone that we encounter this week. May we lavish Christ's abounding goodness upon our families, friends, and colleagues. Holy Spirit, come and equip us in our workplace. Guide us in our school life and inspire us in our neighborhood. May we be your hands and feet to the needy, your words of affirmation to the oppressed, and your arms of comfort to the lonely. Thank you for choosing to use us to bring your kingdom here on earth. Amen.
Maybe.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.